Well, Penn State has been on a little bit of a recruiting tear here in recent days in the last week or so as well. And we're here to break it all down into Penn State going into next season with James Franklin and, of course, Drew Allar under quarterback, a couple coordinator changes, some personnel switches, a couple guys going to the draft. But we're going to get into all of that here and see what we're looking like for Penn State going into 2024. To bring that all to you, I'm here with Zach Seiko. Zach, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, you got it.
All right, Zach. Zach, how you doing today, man? Do you want to introduce yourself and tell the people where you're from?
Absolutely. So I'm from Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm the host and channel publisher over at the Locked On Podcast Network. So you can find that podcast on YouTube daily, post daily. You can also follow me on X, Twitter. Follow the show on X and Twitter and listen. And if you like to listen to it on the audio side, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yep. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Justin Adams. I am a host here. And then Sonny Verma on the end is my co-host. Sonny, go ahead and tell the people where they can find you as well. And how you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm a now new coworker of Zach's. Obviously, you can find me at Locked On Illini. I also have a weekly show, Illini Cast. And of course, you see me here a couple times a month. It's going to be a little bit more frequent. Justin and I have been talking about this as the season starts to creep closer. We're getting such wonderful feedback on the show that it's inspiring both Justin and I to keep creating more content here. So thank you for that. But Absolutely. Having said that, go ahead and hit that subscribe button while you're here. Obviously, the Big Ten is expanding greatly. There's 4 new teams that are going to be entering early August. And so the conference itself is going to drastically change. Now, Penn State is probably one of those teams. I don't know if you call it unlucky, just been in an unfortunate situation over the last couple of years in the sense that they were always been in the same division as arguably 2 of the 5 best teams in the country every single year and never really been able to get over the hump. Is it fair to say that James Franklin and Penn State fans are relieved at this new layout?
Yeah, absolutely, because they've always been on the outside looking in, right? I forget how many times exactly, but more often than not, they would have been in a 12-team college football playoff if you go all the way back to 2014, 2015. So those first couple of seasons when James Franklin was in town, no, because those weren't the scholarship limits and everything else, like those were not good teams. But 2016, when they won the Big Ten championship, 2017, when they were a top 5 team in the country, 2018, 2019, okay, forget about the COVID season, 2020, 2021, they were 7-5, lost in the Outback Bowl. 2022, 2023, right? So these were good football teams, but not good enough when you have only 4 playoff spots. And then Ohio State and Michigan, we want to talk about more often than not, were one of those teams that were taking the top 4 spots.
So I guess I just have a kind of a follow-up question.
Sure.
There's no shame in not being able to beat Ohio State and Michigan. I'm sure you hear the stat all the time. I think I saw that you haven't beaten Ohio State since like 2016 and Michigan since 2020, if I'm correct. Yeah. Now, is there something in particular you can kind of point to as the reason, like you probably haven't been able to, climb over that hump?
It's the side state. Oh, I'm just kidding. For Ohio State. So ironically enough, and it stings a little bit from Penn State's point of view, but Penn State really should have went on a run against the Buckeyes with the 2016 upset. In 2017, they had a double-digit lead in the middle of the 4th quarter, a block punt, and some momentum for Ohio State swings things. They end up winning by a point. And then Penn State, again, had another double-digit lead in 2018 at home, and they blow it with the 4th and 5 where they were trailing. But again, another 1-point deficit where they should have won. So they should have went on a 3-game winning streak. Is that James Franklin's fault? Is that Urban Meyer at the time out coaching Penn State? Probably. It just, a lot of things can happen in those circumstances. And then Ohio State started to pull away again. 2019, I don't really count the COVID year. That was tough for everybody except for the truest of true blue bloods, honestly, that were able to benefit from that. And Penn State's kind of recovering from that lull period in COVID. Michigan, I mean, look how long it took Jim Harbaugh to figure things out at Michigan, because there was the viral post on X, I think, that said, hey, Harbaugh would have been fired if Rutgers makes this field goal or whatever that was. And that's probably true. Like, it was very close to where Michigan and Jim Harbaugh were ready to part ways because they weren't getting to that point. So Ohio State is in a class of itself. Jim Harbaugh needed plenty of time to figure it out, and they did. And they had an all-senior, all-veteran group that led them to this 2023-2024 national title, right? But Ohio State's always been like the cream of the crop. Everybody's chasing them, and that's in part to the fact Ohio State brings in the most revenue as a university, and it's really not even close. I think Penn State they're in the top 10, at least from the 2023 earnings that were just released.
Yeah, they're 7th.
Okay, so but they're behind by 75 million. You can do what with 75 million in athletic revenue alone. So Ohio State just knows what it's doing from a business standpoint, from a football standpoint, and Penn State's not in a large commercial area. So there's a lot of things. I'll kind of cap it off with this here because I could go on off so many different tangents. Penn State is succeeding because of James Franklin, not in spite of him. And it's not like Penn State has been the favorite to win the conference, the favorite to win these games. It's like, oh, well, they can't beat Ohio State and Michigan. Well, they're not projected to either.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're being upset constantly or they're at the top of the Big Ten and they're being knocked off. No, Penn State is always behind, and you can point fault at so many different things, but Ohio State has the facilities, the coaching staff that Penn State's finally catching up to, those small things that don't show up in box scores that most people don't know about on the national level. You can call them excuses. I call them legitimate reasons, honestly, in this age of college football.
Yeah. So, and going into like just talking about last season, what were, a lot of people chastised Drew Allar, and you joked about it before we came on here, about how kind of he takes a lot of the heat, and
it's all his fault.
25 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, like nothing to, but his OC gets fired last year. But like middle of the season, who do you think is, what do you think went wrong last season for the most part that you think can be improved over this season? And is it just specifically the improvement of Drew Allar under potentially the new offensive coordinator, and or just not even the improvement of him, just the fact that last year he was very hamstrung, and so he's probably going to improve as is, just by the simple fact that he's probably going to keep his offensive coordinator throughout the season. So what are some of the things that you think going into this season, coming off of last year and seeing some of those issues, that you're more confident about and excited about that this team can take that step?
I want to speak kind of outwardly to, more of a national audience here, right? Rather than just a Penn State focused one, because what exactly do people want Drew Allar to improve on?
Mm-hmm.
The 25 touchdowns to 2 interceptions? That seems pretty good. What about the ground game that just was lackluster, didn't have those explosive plays? How Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen both ended up having sophomore slumps, right? Or wide receivers that could barely get open, or offensive coordinators that seem to have no confidence in a passing game and turned a 5-star quarterback into a dual threat against the biggest opponents of the season, Ohio State and Michigan. So that's what I want to know. Everyone says Drew Allar stinks. He needs a lot of work. Okay, what does he need to work on? Turning the football over? Doesn't turn the football over. Protects it very well. Well, he can't make this pass. The dude's got a rocket for an arm. He can make just about any throws. The reason he was so inaccurate is because he was protected. If you want to say like, oh, well, he's got inaccuracy issues. Wide receivers weren't getting open. And Penn State's game plan was to essentially mimic what Michigan was doing. JJ McCarthy played mistake-free football, and it worked because they had a more complete team. And JJ McCarthy was more of a mobile quarterback. Drew Allar's, I don't want to say issue, but the problem with Penn State, it was offense. The offense collectively just could not stay on the football field, sustain drives. And it seems like Mike Yurcich, all of it's going to fall on him at the end of the day, because Andy Kotelnicki's supposed to improve an offensive line that was supposed to be a lot better. It wasn't. Wide receivers, because James Franklin's always said it's not a talent issue. Okay, then what is it? He doesn't say what it is. He says the problem with the wide receivers is not a talent issue. What does that mean, coach? What does that mean? And then Drew Allar, again, didn't really do anything wrong. He was directed, play ball control, rely on your defense, but that wasn't enough. And remember, they only lost to Ohio State by single digits. They only lost to Michigan by single digits. 2 college football playoff contenders and one eventual national champion. And honestly, if you don't get a holding call against Kalen King, who knows if Penn State beats Ohio State because of that scoop and score by Curtis Jacobs. And then that falls right into the hands of what Penn State wanted to do with its game plan. Ground and pound, play ball control, and rely on a stifling defense. And it worked against 10 other opponents, just not Ohio State and Michigan.
Yep.
Now, coming into this season, as you kind of referenced, you have two new coordinators, Andy Ketelicki, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Kotelnicki, and Tom Allen. Now, is there like a vibe shift in the culture? Like, has there been like a noticeable improvement? Like, are the players saying anything about, what the practices are like now?
Andy Kotelnicki just seems like an overall, I can't compare him to Mike Yurcich as far as personnel. Just from seeing Kotelnicki in practice, it seems a lot more positive energy. We see about 10 to 15 minutes. Now it's truly in the off season, but during spring football, and we were able to go weekly and capture about 15 to 20 minutes, just take some notes, look around and see what's going on. And Kotelnicki just seemed a little more communicative, just upbeat. And again, it's a fresh start for everybody. It's a fresh start for the offense. It's a fresh start for Kotelnicki, coming over from Kansas. I'm not saying he left a bad thing with the Jayhawks, but it's just like, hey, this is brand new. This is fun. I've never had a 5-star quarterback before. I've never had not one, but two great running backs. And let's see what we can do with the wide receivers, right? So Kotelnicki was very successful at Kansas, but he never had these kinds of caliber of players at Buffalo, right, at Wisconsin Whitewater, right, at Kansas. And now he has that at Penn State. And he has, I don't know exactly what he had at Kansas, but he really has total autonomy of this offense. Like, he is the head coach of the offense. James Franklin is in a little bit of everything, with recruiting, with NIL, with the offense, with the defense, with the position groups, and he wants it to be that way. He acts more as a CEO than he does as a head coach. And he said this. This isn't my opinion. This isn't me trying to come down on James Franklin. He has said, I want a head coach of the defense. I want a head coach of the offense. I want a head coach of the special teams. I want them to be self-reliant. So Andy Kotelnicki, this is his offense, and James Franklin is going to have, co-sign on it and have input as well. But it's Andy Kotelnicki's first and foremost. So yeah, everything's just better because it's new, it's innovative, it's different. So there's just kind of this not even cautious optimism, like just genuine optimism that things are going to be better. Tom Allen to Manny Diaz. Manny Diaz led a top 5 defense, number 1 in a good amount of categories a season ago. Tom Allen's inheriting a pretty good system with a lot of good players. So he's got it made. And he said that, I'm glad not in that way, but that he's happy to just be coaching football again. I don't know how many college football coaches like the whole, being a CEO. James Franklin does. But most of these coaches just want to be football coaches. They don't want to have to do with NIL, donors, negotiations, all that stuff. Just X's and O's. And I think Tom Allen, that's a relief off of his shoulders, just being a defensive coordinator again.
Yep, absolutely. And so just bringing it a little bit back to kind of what you were talking about earlier with the money situation. So in the grand scheme of things in this modern college football landscape, everything's about money and NIL. Where does Penn State stand in terms of, their schools NIL, but also, do they have fan funded NIL, et cetera? Where do they stand in terms of that?
It's not a fun topic up here. Let's just say that much. Penn State's NIL is not great. It's not really good either. You've kind of seen Rutgers become this peripheral recruiting juggernaut, and that's because they figured out NIL. Penn State struggles. I don't know why per se, but there's not this big corporate funding. And again, part of it is I mentioned that. So Ohio State is centered around in one of the biggest commercial areas with Columbus, right? Michigan is near Detroit. They're in Ann Arbor, and they have Fortune 500 companies at their disposal. Penn State's tucked away in the middle of nowhere, central Pennsylvania, with no Fortune 500 companies. So you have to build relationships with Harrisburg, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and then particularly those two cities. That's a 3.5 hour drive, right? So Penn State's already kind of at a disadvantage from where they are commercially. So they focused on trying to get to the fans. Okay, so what's the fan response to this? It's not really, it's kind of annoying in a sense. There's two elements to this. One, if I'm speaking on behalf of the fans, well, I pay for season tickets. I pay for season parking. I buy merchandise. I buy food and drinks at the stadium, right? Why do I need to pitch in for NIL when I already do all of this? So there's that part of it. And then it's just the other uncomfortable conversation. When's Penn State going to acknowledge or not? Or, what's the decision here? Because it's just everyone just mums the word about honoring, recognizing Joe Paterno. And there is I don't know how significant, I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but they're there. There's a portion of the fan base that is like, I am not dealing with NIL. I like James Franklin. I like the team. I hope they succeed, but you're not going to get a penny out of me until you figure out how you want to recognize Joe Paterno in a positive light. I'm not here to debate any of that. I'm just saying that's what a portion of the fan base is. So when you're asking fans who are already reluctant to the idea of NIL, and then you have that part of it as well, not everybody's aligned here like they are in Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama over the new age of college football.
And just looking at the recruiting class this year, right now, I think you are third in the Big Ten and 15th overall nationally, or at least somewhere around there. So when it comes to the NIL, have you noticed, maybe Penn State missing out on anybody? Has it become a noticeable thing that has cost y'all players or potentially improvements this offseason?
Yeah, it has. I mean, just in short, I can sit here and rattle off a list of names if you'd like me to, but I really, again, at the end of the day, these are high school football. They're kids. They're still high school kids. They're recruits. So I can point fingers and say, hey, so-and-so ended up taking an NIL deal, or he was linked to an NIL deal. Look at the sponsorships. But a lot of times when I am talking to other local sources, and just gathering other, research about, hey, how did this recruitment go? How did this commitment go? What was we've had prospects say to recruiting analysts or people that cover it closely, like, Penn State does a really good job recruiting, but not all things are equal. Okay, well, what do you mean when you say not all things are equal? Money. Okay. Other schools are just offering more NIL, better NIL, consistent NIL. Penn State is there's kind of a two-part system to its NIL. It's one, that they don't have all the NIL funds that they should. And then number two, it's how they are spending it. Okay. A school like, Texas A&M, right? A lot of the Southwest, Southeast schools are not afraid to have recruits on campus and pay them to be there. Right? Florida, for example, has been alleged to pay recruits to show up just for visits. Penn State's not doing that. Penn State will never do that. So that's the other part of it too. It's they don't exactly have the NIL funds, and it's also how they're choosing to spend them.
Yep. So just sorry, go ahead, Sonny. Go ahead, Asher.
Go ahead.
Just one more question on the recruiting. If you had to name kind of your, I guess, under the radar, your favorite recruit in this 2024 class, and then kind of your under the radar recruit, what would you say are your favorites in terms of that?
So they have 20 so far. Beckham Kritz is the quarterback in this class. They ended up taking 3 running backs there. I'm looking forward to the wide receivers because potentially they could land 5 wide receiver commits. There's still some that are left out there that haven't verbally committed. But the 2 that have had, Lyric Samuel and Jeff Exner, are both very, very talented wide receivers, and they fly under the radar. I mean, Lyric Samuel is 6'4" and might be one of the fastest players in this class overall. Okay, so you have a 6'4" prospect, and he's as fast as he is. And then Jeff Exner isn't the exact opposite, but he's 6'2", 220 pounds. And he's just more of your possession type of receiver where cornerbacks, they're just not big enough to cover him. He can box you out. He's essentially playing basketball on a football field. He uses his frame. He's a smart, intelligent wide receiver. He's not slow, but he's not, I wouldn't say like a Lyric Samuel fast. So I'm just kind of, continuing to see, because the passing game has been made fun of. It was abysmal in 2023. Is it going to get better? And it can start if you have 2 verbally committed as we sit here and have this conversation. But I'd like to see them, somewhere get 4 or 5. Those targets, like Cyrus, who's in Pennsylvania. Taz Williams is rumored to potentially commit to Penn State, and he's been a heavy Michigan target, Texas A&M. So if Penn State can win out against those guys, I can name Darius Dixon, who is the top prospect in the class. He's the cornerback out of California. So Penn State is still doing a good job of recruiting despite the NIL circumstances.
100%.
So speaking of recruiting, let's talk about, some of the bigger names that are going to be joining Penn State this upcoming season, like former five-star Julian Fleming. What kind of role is he going to be expected to play in the offense moving forward?
I hope it's a teaching, like a student, like a teacher student type of role here, because I don't need Julian Fleming actually to as much as great it would be to be 800, 900, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, right? The thing that he was supposed to live up to as a 5-star receiver, and it never materialized. He's come back home. I want him to set the precedent for Penn State wide receivers. The reason Dante Cephas and Keandre Lambert-Smith did not work out at Penn State is because they never truly stepped up as veterans, as mentors, and I want Julian Fleming to be that. Now, that's me personally. What I think Julian Fleming is going to offer as far as stats goes and everything else. I mean, there's Trey Wallace. They're going to spread the football out. Tyler Warren's probably going to be your leading receiver, as he should, because he is potentially a possible first or second round pick at the tight end position in next year's NFL draft. So Tyler Warren's going to be essentially your wide receiver one. Trey Wallace is good. Julian Fleming has had an up and down career at Ohio State. He's battled injuries, so we'll see. He says he's the healthiest in his career. But the running game will be better because he's an avid blocker. Penn State didn't have any blockers in the wide receiver group. Now you have one. Julian Fleming's a very good one. So that will help. And he'll just be able to command some attention from the respect of he's a veteran of college football. He does have that 5-star pedigree, even though he hasn't lived up to it, but he's still going to gain some attention. So if he can give you about, 40 catches, 500, 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, that's a good season there. I just want him to be that mentor for everybody else so that Penn State doesn't have this significant drop-off since Jahan Dotson left just a few years ago.
And how about the other side of the field? When you think of their incoming transfers, you have a guy like A.J. Harris from Georgia. What's expected of him?
He's supposed to be that total lockdown island cornerback. That's what he's supposed to be. I like what I've seen out of A.J. Harris just from a little bit of practice in the spring game itself, but that's such a small sample size. They didn't play much at Georgia, so we don't know. A lot of this is, hey, Andy Kotelnicki's offense has all the potential in the world. Drew Allar has all the potential in the world. Singleton and Allen do. A.J. Harris is in that similar conversation. We just don't know. We know that he can be capable of great things, but we have to see it. We haven't. There's nothing to tell me that A.J. Harris is going to be a superstar other than, he's got the recruiting rating, and if he can put it all together in the spring game, he showed some flashes. But again, that's essentially a glorified practice. So A.J. Harris has all the talent in the world. He behaves like a number one cornerback that Penn State wants him to be, where he's not afraid to go up and stuff the run. He's not afraid to put his helmet into the pile and go make a tackle, go make a big hit. He's very good at play recognition from what I've seen so far. But what happens when you have more coverage opportunities? Okay. Andy Kotelnicki's offense in that spring game was 5% from what players were quoting it at. Oh yeah, we were only running 5% of the offense. Okay. So A.J. Harris went up against 5% of the offense. Well, what happens when he actually does have to go up against not Oregon this season, but USC? It's got a really good wide receiver core. Washington's still going to be really good. Ohio State is obviously going to be really good. How's he going to look against Emeka Egbuka again for the Buckeyes come early November?
Yeah, absolutely. Because those are the matchups you have to think about. Because again, the biggest hump to get over is, of course, Ohio State not beating them since 2016, Michigan since 2020. So when looking at, each coach and what I've found in just kind of like researching these teams and listening to other people talk about them, each coach seems to have their own kind of strategy to the portal. What is James Franklin's philosophy when going after, guys in the portal, and what are the type of guys that he goes after? Or is it just kind of like, he's going after the best players that he can get available, or is it more of a fit scheme type of thing?
It's a fit scheme type of thing, to answer it directly. You have your Colorados who focus entirely on NIL and everything else, and their strategy is focused on trying to create a fantasy team essentially out of the transfer portal. James Franklin doesn't want to do that. He knows the value of chemistry. He knows the value of discipline in this, especially in this age of college football. He wants to build and stack recruiting classes, and that are just going to be that they are going to be truly committed to Penn State. They're not going to be there for, NIL. What kind of money am I going to get? Even though that's a central question now when it is recruiting, but people that aren't going to be one and dones essentially and always constant flight risks. You don't want to have to be worried about re-recruiting your own team. And that's fine. If you want to be a Colorado type and other programs that, hey, we want to use the transfer portal and plug any position that we need. James Franklin and Penn State want the transfer portal, and they've said this, to complement 95% of the roster, because there's going to be turnover. They're going to need players. They were trying to recruit a linebacker out of the transfer portal. They needed that for the depth, but they didn't get it. And that happens. But Penn State doesn't want to have to build its roster overnight through the transfer portal. They're absolutely against that.
So talking a little bit about James Franklin, I argue he's probably one of the most talked about coaches in the entire country. It used to be in the off seasons, he'd be rumored for, every new hot job opening. And now it seems like he's kind of settled in Happy Valley. Let me ask you a question. You fill in the blank. James Franklin is a top blank coach in America.
I'll go conservative and say top 15. Now personally, because what are we basing this off of? Is he, as far as an X's and O's coach goes, James Franklin's further down the list. But when we're talking about a program manager, a general manager in this age of college football, James Franklin is one of the best. The battles that he's gone up against, I don't know how many other coaches would have succeeded at Penn State with going out, battling for more money for assistant coaches, redoing the facilities, redoing the dormitories, and now NIL. Like, everything's just a struggle. Whereas Ryan Day will ask for something. Yep, you got it. In the case of Nick Saban, now Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. Yep, you got it. There's unity. There's alignment. I don't know how many other coaches could have come to Penn State and done all that much better. So James Franklin is not a bad head coach. He's not an average head coach. Do I think there are more football savvy coaches than him? Absolutely. I think, for example, Kalen DeBoer, I think, is a better X's and O's coach than James Franklin. That's not controversial of me to say. And there's probably a dozen others that I could name if I had them in front of me here. But as far as program managers goes and running a college football system, James Franklin's top 10. If you're looking for X's and O's football head coach, there's debatable where he ends up in a top 15 or a top 20 list.
So I guess the last question I'll ask in terms of just kind of the offseason, and then we'll get into kind of expectations and maybe predictions for next year. Are there any spring standouts? Some guys that maybe weren't on the radar coming into the spring that have you've heard a lot about between the coaching staff or reporters that have kind of come on strong?
We've already mentioned AJ Harris. Again, AJ Harris is going to be your number one cornerback for Penn State, but it's just a matter of what he can do. Where is he going to meet his potential in his first year of starting? That's tough to say, but AJ Harris has had a really good spring. Zach Wheatley has had a really good spring. He's been a backup rotational safety. He was announced as the turnover king one off season or two off seasons ago, but James Franklin has praised him immensely, saying it finally clicked for Zach Wheatley. So Penn State's probably going to end up using three safeties. I imagine them to run a 4-2-5 defense with Tom Allen because of the limited linebacker depth. And one of those, say whether it's KJ Winston or Jalen Reed, one of those guys is going to act as that third linebacker. So they're going to end up running a 4-2-5 more often than not because they'll have 5 defensive backs out there, 3 safeties.
Which 4-2-5 is, it's 3-3-5s, 4-2-5s. Defenses like that are starting to become more common because they're better able to match the speed of the ever evolving game, especially now with mobile quarterbacks liking to attack the edges and stuff like that. So now, go ahead, Sonny.
Well, I was just going to say, Penn State is a very trendy pick for next season. You're obviously returning a lot of players. You get a kind of a favorable schedule in the sense that you get to avoid the Michigan, Oregon, and Iowa. And obviously Ohio State you're going to get at home. What would you say what are your expectations of what you want to see the Nittany Lions look like next season?
There is a case for them to potentially go 12-0, right? It's a small percentage, but there is a case where they could go 12-0. On paper, they're 11-1. They're going to be favored against 11 of the teams. Everything's equal, home and road, but the rosters right now, Penn State is better than 11 of the teams on this schedule. Ohio State is the only one. So they're better than USC. They're better than Washington. They're better than all the other opponents that they're going to face other than the Buckeyes. So as far as my expectations and predictions, I'm going to go, I've said 10-2. I say 10-2 because Penn State is better than 11 of those teams. I think they lose to Ohio State again, but this is what we're talking now in July. Anything can change. Penn State is there. Ohio State, I think at the first initial spread isn't that big of a favorite. I think it opened as a 3.5 or a 4-point favorite, and it might have moved in favor, but that's what Vegas thinks of Penn State at home against the Buckeyes. So it's not like, oh, they're double-digit underdogs. They're 2-touchdown underdogs to Ohio State. No, it's within a touchdown. So Vegas believes that Penn State is going to be very good. You just don't know with a James Franklin program and having to travel to Southern California for the first time. Yeah, you get a bye week, but then you got to go to Camp Randall like that back to back. Wisconsin's going to have a top 10 defense. So Sonny, you say the schedule's easy. Honestly, in the past 20 years, I don't think there's a schedule that's comparable to this. I think this is Penn State's toughest schedule in recent memory. And they haven't gone to Southern California in the regular, like this is different, right? You go to the Rose Bowl at the end of the season, you have a month to prepare. USC is right in the middle of the season. You get a bye week after a 6-hour plane ride home, and then you got to go to a Wisconsin team, which will be improved and defensively is going to be really good. So I say 10-2 with the factor of, because you can't quantify it. You can look at the analytics and, who's better on paper so much. I think they lose my prediction's USC, but they could end up losing to either of USC or Wisconsin. I think that's just too tough a turnaround. And then you have Ohio State after that. Then you have Washington after that. Like it might be an easy schedule compared to some others, but it's not when you look at Penn State's historically over the past 2 decades.
The good thing about it is now, Penn State can afford to potentially lose 2, depending on how those teams finish.
Right.
If you have 1 or 2 losses to an Ohio State, and depending on how USC looks this season, those couldn't, outside of that, though, the schedule, Wisconsin's very much a wild card, but outside of that, the schedule seems to be, pretty favorable outside of just that really rough stretch. So, you have that opener against West Virginia. That's probably going to be tough, just as a sneaky opener against
a wake-up call, right?
Conference school, but Penn State should handle that. But should probably be undefeated going into that SEC or the USC game. So that'll be interesting to see how that stretch goes, and it'll probably be that good test that people need to see Drew Allar kind of push through, maybe set himself apart. If he can go in there and beat an Ohio State, even if you drop to USC or Wisconsin or both, you beat an Ohio State that's a big monkey off of Penn State's back and his back as well. So, all right, well, that'll do it for us here, Zach. Do you want to tell the people where they can find you? First off, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much again. You want to tell people one more time where they can find you, what you're working on and stuff like that. And the links to his stuff will be in the description. So.
Absolutely. Again, I want to thank you guys for inviting me on the show and having me giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Penn State football. You can follow all of my work over on X. There's a Locked On Nittany Lions account. There's my personal account, which is my name. You can follow the show, keep up with the show, and subscribe to it on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Pretty simple, straightforward. Sonny,
anything to close out before we hit the road here?
No, I just want to also thank Zach for joining us. If you are a Penn State fan, I think he's the go-to source for all your Nittany Lions information. And if you're looking for Big Ten stuff, again, Justin and I finally passed 1,000 subscribers with our last Nebraska video. So thank you guys so much. Penn State fans, you have a lot to live up to. I mean, we gained almost 100 subs strictly from Nebraska. So let's have Penn State Nation show up for this one.
Yep. And y'all can find me at Nebraska Football at the Voice of College Football. So, if you want to upset me, just outdo Nebraska fans, and then you'll upset me, Penn State. Okay. So that's all you got to do. But like I said, that'll do it for us here. We got a lot of stuff coming up for y'all on the channel. Now that we got the monetization, we're going to come up with some different ideas and things to keep, everybody engaged on the channel throughout the season and beyond. So a lot of fun stuff coming up for y'all. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn the notification bell on to be updated with all the latest and greatest. And we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.